Welcome back, everybody. We are back in the book of Esther. We're going to do chapters 6 and 7 today, a twofer. And I know what you're thinking 6 and 7. I'm not going to say it, don't worry. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so chapter 6 opens with that night the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. That night the king had trouble sleeping. No miracles being announced, no prophet is speaking, just straight up insomnia from the king, and you can see that heaven is behind it. King Xerxes orders the chronicles to be read to him, and wouldn't you know it, the exact record that he finds is the record of Mordecai saving his life from a few years prior, saving his life from an assassination attempt, and that is read out loud to him. Out of all the records on that one night, this is the one that just happens to be read by the guy to the king, and heaven is moving, that's all I can say. So, verse 3, the king asked, "What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this?" The king asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." Nothing. And at that exact moment, guess who walks in? Mr. Haman himself. The guy that's sort of the villain in this story. He walks in, and he doesn't walk in to bless Mordecai, but he walks in to ask for permission to hang Mordecai on the sharpened pole gallows that he had built back in chapter 5. The irony is already starting to kind of feel pretty thick here because while Haman is plotting murder, God is arranging honor for the very same guy. And that's just cool. So before Haman can sort of speak up and make his request to hang and kill Mordecai, verse 6 says this. So Haman came in and the king said, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" So Haman, in his sort of peak pride moment, he thinks, he's probably talking about me. Who would the king rather honor than me? He assumes the spotlight belongs to him, and I think that the reality here is that pride has a way of writing scripts that we are always the hero, we're always the hero of that story, and pride will always do that to us. So Haman, believing it's for himself, he describes this sort of royal parade. He wants the king's robe, the king's horse, a royal crown, a public proclamation that says, "This is what will be done for the man who the king delights in. This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." But then comes the reversal because the king in verse 10 says this. "Excellent," the king said to Haman. "Quick, take the robes from my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing that you have suggested." Isn't that just special? You can almost hear heaven laughing at this, at Haman sort of cringing like this, like, you got to be kidding me right now. The man who had built gallows now is the man that the king is saying, "Hey, you are going to lead the parade. You're going to shout that proclamation for Mordecai the Jew." So the enemy becomes the announcer of honor for Mordecai. The proud man has to publicly exalt the very person that he hates. And afterward, in verse 12, it says this. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. Notice the contrast here. Mordecai goes back to work. There's no chest pounding, no victory lap. He just gets back to his quiet faithfulness that he's become known for. Haman, of course, he spirals into a mental disaster and he's just fuming, fuming, fuming. And chapter 6 ends with Haman's own advisors recognizing what had happened. They say, "Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue to oppose him." So they can feel the shift of the tide. They can feel that things are starting to turn. So then, getting right into chapter 7, you can feel the tension kind of getting to its breaking point. Queen Esther finally reveals her request at the second banquet to the king. The king asks her yet again in verse number 2, "Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." Esther replies in verse 3. She says, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, but for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king." So the king is like, "What? Who would dare kill my beautiful queen Esther and her people?" He's outraged at this point. Verse 6, you get Esther's reply. It says, "This wicked man Haman, our adversary and our enemy." Haman grew pale with fright before the king and the queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. So in a single sentence, the hunter becomes the hunted. In a single sentence, God took what the enemy meant for evil and he turned it around for good. Esther points him out as the man that would do all of this, the king is outraged, and then that turns the whole story right around. It's like the hokey pokey. So the king, he steps out in fury. He kind of goes out into the palace grounds. Haman stays behind, terrified. In his final act of desperation, he falls on the couch where Esther's reclining to beg for his life. And at exactly that moment, the king walks back in, and the optics of this is pretty devastating. Haman is begging for his life, but to the king, it looks like he is trying to assault or hurt Esther. And so in verse 8, he says, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. So that seals Haman's fate right there, and it's not looking good for this fella. But how will they do it? Verse 9 says, "Then Harbona, one of the king's units, said, 'Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in this very courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination.' 'Then impale Haman on it,' the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. The very man Haman meant to destroy was honored in his place, and the very instrument Haman designed to destroy Mordecai becomes the very instrument for his own downfall and destruction." Won't he do it? I mean, some of the big themes that we've seen throughout the book of Esther is that God's providence often looks like coincidence to a lot of us. It looks like ordinary circumstances. Even something as simple as insomnia, where the king could not sleep, becomes the thing that delivered Mordecai, that honored Mordecai. The second thing we see here is that pride blinds us. Pride leads us to places of destruction, and we see that with Haman, where his very downfall was his pride. It began long before he built these gallows. It began when he wanted to put himself on a pedestal above everyone else, and when he sought to destroy the Jews and Mordecai specifically, God turned it around. God turned it around and used it against him. There's a Christian song that says, "You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good." And I think that that is something that really resonates here, because the very thing that Haman built, these gallows, the 75-foot spectacle to kill Mordecai, became the very platform of his own defeat. And the other thing that's most important here is that God doesn't need to announce himself to be active in a situation. His name is never mentioned in the book of Esther, but his fingerprints are on every page, and you can see that in how things are being orchestrated and maneuvered. So, where in our lives does it feel like nothing is happening? And could God be working in ways that we simply can't see, or preparing us for a season of better for us? I think the key is to stay faithful. The key is to, even if it looks like nobody's paying attention or you're not getting the recognition perhaps that you think you need, just stay faithful with God's purposes, and heaven keeps receipts. Do I have unchecked pride in my heart that is quietly convincing me that the story revolves around me? Am I taking something that God meant for his glory, and am I making it all about me? I think that's something that we all can struggle with from time to time, and it's something that we need to constantly check in on and say, "God, am I doing this for your glory, or am I doing this for my own pride?" All right, the big idea is this: the same God who worked through that sleepless night of King Xerxes, who worked through finding the exact forgotten record that showed Mordecai saving the king's life years prior, the very same God that worked through a prideful man, Haman, and turned what he had meant for evil into good, and the very same God that used a courageous queen, Queen Esther, that very same God is still orchestrating the details of our lives, even the details that we can't see. God is able to reverse what looks irreversible. He's able to expose what seems untouchable, and he's able to redeem what feels delayed in our life. So the question is not whether or not he is working, it's whether we trust him while he works. So when you're in a season where the night feels long and the evil seems loud, and when your obedience feels unnoticed, just remember these two chapters here, because he did it then, he's still doing it now. Won't he do it?